Okay, good morning, everybody. My name's Rob McCargow. I'm the Director of AI at PwC. Welcome to the farm stage. There's a story behind this. I tweeted last night, if I got 100 likes promoting this session, I'd wear wellies live on stage, and Twitter came good. So has anyone ever seen a guy wearing wellies on a stage before, apart from Glastonbury? Breaking ground here. So thank you so much for joining this session today. We've got an esteemed panel I'll introduce shortly. We're at a really interesting juncture with regards to harnessing the power of AI to solve some of our most intractable problems in business and society. We have the opportunity to unleash $16 trillion worth of growth in the next 12 years or so. And we're starting to see AI scaling in tremendous ways across a range of use cases. But are we at the risk of squandering this opportunity? How are we going to accelerate progress? And how are we going to embed ethics into the application of this technology? We've got a great hour ahead. I'm just going to briefly introduce the panel. I want to get into some interesting conversation. So at the far end, I'm joined by Dr. Norberto Andrade, Privacy and Public Policy Manager from Facebook. Here we've got Amir Banifatemi, the General Manager, Innovation and Growth at the XPRIZE Foundation. We've got Professor Luciano Floridi, Professor of Philosophy and Ethics and Information at the University of Oxford. And finally, Carolyn Herzog, Executive Vice President and General Counsel at ARM. And Carolyn, you also chair the Working Group on AI Ethics for ARM as well. So welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. I think, first of all, Luciano, we're on the ethics stage, aren't we? And
Yes,
I think the first thing you wanted to do was make sure we got one thing clear. So is it ethics is or ethics are?
Yes, that's a good point, actually. Whenever you go, anyone ever says mathematics are? Of course not. That's funny English for you. So ethics is, and if you hear anyone, oh, that's a bad joke, I know it's coming, but if you hear anyone talking about ethics are, walk out. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't even know that is a singular word. Now, why is crucial? Now, not just because it's a grammar point, but because you hear a lot people saying, oh, whose ethics, my ethics, your ethics, ethics are. No, variety, pluralism, relativism. The good reason to be here today is because, at least as far as these sustainable development goals, we're all on the same page. So maybe there are different values. Maybe we will never get on the same page across the world when it comes to, say, what it means to be a good person. But with the SDGs, if anyone disagrees, the ball is on their side. They have to have an argument to tell us that this is not good. So at least ethics is, and ethics is good for a common framework provided by the SDGs. As simple as that.
Ethics is. Okay, we can go home now.
Ethics
Clear that
is.
up. Thank you very much. Now, you've seen the sign across the stage today in the expo, which is one of my favorite stands, I think. Lots of these nice badges to give out. Carolyn, could you just give us a quick introduction to 2030Vision and the work that ARM are doing on this field?
Yeah. ARM was really in at the ground level. Everybody hear me? No.
Pass that mic.
All right. So much for Madonna mics. ARM was really in at the ground level in establishing the global goals, and I think everybody at this point knows that there are the 17 global goals established in 2015, and we're really proud, and it's been absolutely thrilling to be here and to hear everybody talking about these global goals. So we're just so excited to be a part of this, and you know, there's three main topics that we're talking about, but of course it's part of the 17 global goals, and that's to end poverty, to end climate change, and to promote equality. So that's what we're really here to talk about, and to be part of the ethics conversation. I was here last year, so excited to be back here again, but these are the primary focuses, and it's just really, really important to have all of you here today and the massive numbers that are here today talking about them and really getting involved in the 17 global goals. Technology underlies all of that, and technology is incredibly important in enabling the sustainability of these global goals, and AI is a big part of that conversation.
Thank you, Carolyn. And Amir, you and I have been working together for the last 3 years on the AI for Good Global Summit at the UN. We had the last edition 2 weeks ago, and I think that agenda's moved on quite a bit. I mean, first of all, there was debate by the previous panel about the whole concept of AI for good. Is it a poor moniker? Is there a way of describing it? Can you just, for the purpose of the clarification for the audience, explain what we mean by AI for good?
Thank you, Rob. Yes, Rob mentioned that we have been working together for the past 3 years on a conference called AI for Good Global Summit. This conference was actually born out of an effort that XPRIZE Foundation did 4 years ago, where we, for the first time, and for those who don't know, XPRIZE is a nonprofit organization that launches massive competitions, public competitions, to solve the world grand challenges. And it goes from going to space or cleaning the oceans or improving literacy or fighting basically what the sustainable development goals are about. And 4 years ago, we came up to this decision to launch a very open competition called the AI XPRIZE, and it was sponsored by Watson, IBM Watson at that time, to recognize efforts that are being made on AI to solve the grand challenges. And we basically made this competition very open. So that gives us about 10,000 interested parties to come forward, and out of that, 150 teams were selected. And when we start mapping those 150 proposals coming from 83 countries, we realized that they are actually talking about poverty, about climate change, about education, about health, about gender equality, about oceans, about economic impact. And it matches very well the 17 Sustainable Development Goals at that time. And we were very excited to work with our partners at the time, ITU and UNESCO, to start this conversation about maybe what people want is to use AI for good. Maybe beneficial AI is what they want, is to use not AI just for improvement of industrial methods or processes or automation or improvement of digital transformation, which is legitimately important, but also what came out to us was talking about grand challenges. And those grand challenges match very well the Sustainable Development Goals. So we started this conversation about 3 years ago by saying, who are the stakeholders to talk about AI for good? And when we did the first instance, and Rob was there the first time as well with PwC, we realized that stakeholders are governments, are academics, are entrepreneurs, are impact investors, are foundations, are for-profit organizations. Everybody is interested, and there is this debate between, I have data, I have a problem, I can help you with this, and I need help with that. So this conversation basically got started, and we realized that AI for good has a specific meaning. But doesn't mean that AI is not for bad. AI also could be used in a harmful way, and we try to talk about beneficial AI. How can AI be leveraged as an extension of our intelligence, our human ingenuity, to frame problems and to solve them en masse. So that's what basically what the conference is about. And now we have, I think, a good momentum globally with a very large conference, with all the stakeholders come to talk about implementations of Sustainable Development Goals and the goals in general through artificial intelligence, which I think is a very interesting debate today, simply because AI is not the fix-all technology, but it's probably the one that mimics the best our capability of looking at problems and evaluating them. So I can talk about that a little bit more.
Very happy, thank you, Amir. And Norberto, maybe if you could just expand a bit upon some of the focus area of your work currently around harnessing AI to solve some of the grand challenges.
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Is this working? Okay. Yeah, so a little bit about me. So I work in the privacy and public policy team at Facebook, and I have the privilege of actually working with product managers, designers, engineers that are working specifically on AI and machine learning. So I actually get the chance to review what they're building from a privacy and ethical perspective, but also being part of the public policy team. The other part of my work is actually to reach out and talk and discuss with influential stakeholders, from policymakers to privacy advocates to academics. So I kind of navigate the whole spectrum from the world of engineering, product managing, all the way to policy making. And working on AI and machine learning, one of the main concerns that I have and that we have as a company is to understand how we can maximize the good of AI while minimizing the harm. So I spend part of my time trying to mitigate some of the concerns around bias and fairness or transparency or other key ethical issues around AI, but it's also important to understand to what extent we can leverage this technology for the benefit of the world, and this is something that we are very invested in doing. So having the broad and ambitious mission of bringing the world closer together and giving people the power to build a community that is very associated with UN SDG goals. So we think we have a very important role to play in advancing those very same goals. And we think as technology developers that AI can play a very important role. So there are some key projects that, that we've been investing and we've been developing in order to do that. That I can briefly mention the fact that we're joining the 2030 Vision, the coalition, and we are very much aligned on their approach of being a partnership-first approach and very centered on Project 17 of the UN SDGs, really strengthening the role of global partnerships to advance the UN SDGs and to understand to what extent the technology can help us move towards that, that goal. And also the 2030 Vision and some of its key areas around AI for good, data for good, but also the role of education, awareness, and activating the global community for that goal. It's something that we share and that we believe as a company have also an important role to play. There are also other projects, but I think we'll have time to delve into those
Sure we
as well.
will, yeah. Thank you very much, Norberto. Now, I think when this topic's evolved over the recent years, it was slightly niche, like the sustainability agenda generally, and it's starting to feel like it's becoming more hardwired into the day-to-day running of business and embedded into strategies. Carolyn, maybe if you could just expand further upon how ARM are looking at hardwiring this debate into everyday business rather than having it as a niche off on the side.
Well, one thing we've
Yeah.
the mic. One thing we've done as an example is that, of course, every company has their vision, mission, and strategy, and we've named our corporate social responsibility vision and mission as part of our corporate social responsibility strategy, and we've specifically gone through the global goals and talked about them at our all-hands agenda. So we want to make sure that everybody in the company understands that these global goals are important to us and that our corporate social responsibility strategy is part of the global mission and strategy. And our CEO takes this very seriously. He's made sure that the company knows that this is something that we invest in and that we talk about. In fact, this week, he's in New York at a CEO forum talking about bias and making sure that other CEOs knows that he takes this very seriously. And obviously, we're here talking about it, so we take it as a top-down strategy, and we make sure that the company knows that these are things that we take very seriously.
And underneath the 17 overarching goals, there's 200 and odd sub-goals, isn't there, as well? I mean, are there particular ones that you guys are focusing on, going big on, or ones that you're particularly trying to accelerate towards?
Well, from an AI perspective, we've looked at that from a working group strategy. We are actually developing a manifesto that we would like to make public, and within that manifesto, there are certain areas that we think we can make a difference on. So we really try to be honest about it. We don't want to profess that we can do everything well. Within that, bias is a particular interest for us, so we really want to make sure that we're stepping forward in that, and transparency is another one where we think that's something that we believe our customers and our customers' customers, because ARM is an IP company and we license our IP to our partners, and we think that's something that our customers think is really, really important. So that's something that we think we should go big on and that we should be really clear about.
And Luciano, as part of your work, you've been looking at mapping the progress towards some of these goals. Which ones are receiving the most attention at the moment?
Yes, so some time ago we realized that, of course, AI for good, we should change the narrative, also maybe later manage expectations, but maybe we will have time to discuss this in a moment. And so we started looking at who is doing what, really, down the road. And so we started mapping, thanks to a donation from Facebook. You need money to do these kind of things. We started mapping who was doing what around the world, and we found that it was just a sampling, so no systematic analysis, almost impossible. But we found about 150 projects that were using real AI, not just the sprinkle that you sort of advertise on top. They had been around for 6 months at least, so real projects, no blue sky academic stuff like mine, and they had a positive impact. And so once we started doing this, we found that roughly 60, 65 projects were really interesting. And I wrote this down.
Could you give a few examples?
The 5 that, so the 2 sort of SDGs that are most subscribed in our own sampling, we might have a partial view, are the area of peace and justice, the health and cities, And I like to call that a bit of the feasibility trap. It's doable, and therefore more people do it. But the 5 that have been hugely undersubscribed are poverty, gender equality, speaking of which, clean water, affordable energy, and peace justice. Now, I don't think, and I close here, that there's anything in the technology that makes it unfeasible for clean water. So what happens is, what happens in London, one pub gets a lot of clients, and all of a sudden, that's where you go. Another pub starts losing clients, and nobody goes there. There's nothing wrong with the pub. It's just that, winner takes all. So I think one thing that we should probably discuss is how do we make sure that all the 17 are addressed equally, especially ones that are really low-hanging fruits.
Amir, when we, sorry.
Yeah, I would just add that there are many good things about this project, but one of them is actually looking to projects that are currently on the ground that are being developed and extracting also lessons from that. So understanding what works, what doesn't, and instead of just extracting ethical principles from textbooks, with nothing wrong with that, we just have way too many right now. This project actually is way more pragmatic, and it looks at how tech developers on the ground are conducting and pursuing this project, leveraging AI to address SDGs and understanding what actually works and what can create a sort of precedent for other technology developers in the future that are willing to embark in similar projects. What can they learn from that? So I would really underline the fact that this project is doing that mapping exercise, understanding those gaps, explaining them, but also helping future tech developers to understand what AI for Good really consists of and what lessons they can learn from this
And are there very specific examples of applications that are proven to create impact, Alberto, at all, or Carolyn, I don't know?
Yeah, I could add to that. I think ARM has really partnered very successfully with UNICEF, for example, and we've had a number of tech for good type competitions, and we run a WASH program in the last year using digital tools and AI to look for programs for clean water that have been very successful. So the WASH program that was run last year and is ongoing is actually creating that kind of competition where we're innovating from a ground up at a very low cost kind of environment, and these kinds of programs with UNICEF have proven to be very successful.
Amir, over the last 3 years with the summit in Geneva as well, I think we started extremely high level on the 17 and moved much more granular year by year as it's gone from there. Which are the ones that you personally have seen that have advanced quickly, and particular examples would be great to learn about?
I'm going to borrow from these last 3 years of conference, but also from our own XPRIZE experience with our 150 SIMs that we had, and a concurrable Luciano. I think health was probably the most discussed and subject discussed with. But also we saw a lot of distribution on water, sanity and education, and then gender equality as well, and also energy and oceans. The interesting part that we learned, and I'm going to ask her a question as well, is that there's a critical path in solving problems. So for instance, if we put the same amount of energy in dealing with sanitation and health and well-being, and you don't treat the water first, well, a number of issues coming from clean water. So maybe you have to put some effort and explain the rationale and the connection between different sustainable goals and how they relate to each other, and try to build those, what I call critical path and optimal scenarios, and learn from that. What we also learned from the competition in the last 3 years is that talking about the sustainable development goals is good. Practically speaking, it has to come bottom up, because most problems are in the hands of what we call problem owners. Problem owners are people that are living daily with those issues, whether it's a city or a farmer or a mom at home with education issues, or a politician with government city issues. They know the problem, they know the context, they know where the data are realized, they know everything about it, but then they're basically muted in terms of solving it. So we realized that there is really a need for a gap between, on one hand, the problem owners, and the other one, the problem solvers. And problem solvers could be entrepreneurs, could be advocates, could be AI practitioners or technologists, and there is a gap. And this gap is a knowledge gap, it's a jargon gap. They don't talk the same language. And they know different things, and the collaboration we're talking about, and we discovered that through 3 years of experiencing from 17 goals to 5 goals each time, and we went from satellite mapping for for detection of refugees or clean water or deforestation or wildfires to detecting asthma and different signs of health and well-being for smartphones and you name it. And then what we learn is that really these patterns of problem solving repeats itself. There is need for data, there is need for privacy, there is need for different buckets that appears, and if we can organize those into a framework, then really we can probably learn from each other. The same problem that could appear in Buenos Aires may be the same in Ho Chi Minh City. But nobody knows that we have the same problems, which is tainted differently because of historical background, economic realities, different contexts, and different type of data and different expectations. So as we learn more about their experiences and collectively what we work together, I think the opportunity really is have this common framework, sharing knowledge about how we solve problems with AI and not use AI to solve problems, but humans solving problems with AI and leveraging the lessons learned in form of templates. That template could be distributed in an open source fashion, if you will. This is what we really need to promote and to progress. And we started this through the conference, actually, and we announced recently the launch of data commons and AI commons as a way to gather all the knowledge globally to share.
Maybe pick the data commons up in a moment, actually. That might be interesting to get to. Carolyn, any points on that?
I just want to add a couple more comments because I think everybody's more aware these days that AI is being used to augment healthcare professionals and in the healthcare field, and there's more data being used in healthcare probably than in any other field. And the augmentation of healthcare workers is really phenomenal. So we know that in Alzheimer's patients, for instance, the diagnosis can be 10 years earlier than it has been previously, and who wouldn't want to be diagnosed 10 years earlier and be able to treat 10 years, be able to be treated 10 years earlier. You mentioned asthma, and asthma is really remarkable. My brother was asthmatic growing up and always had one of those puffers that he was carrying around with him. ARM has partnered with a company to produce a little asthma inhaler called Respiro, and that's being used with AI technology so that doctors can now get artificial intelligence being automatically sent to them so they can know for a child, for instance, how much medicine they're inhaling, how frequently they're inhaling, and it's really helping to save lives because I think there's some data that says that 250,000 people a year are still dying from asthma attacks, and so that's really kind of remarkable technology that can give parents an incredible amount of relief. ARM is also partnering with the Great Ormond Street Hospital using camera technology to detect how frequently patients are being visited by professionals, how they're detecting sort of their facial distress as well. So rather than people just checking in at a desk, they can now see how often a patient is being visited. And it's really kind of remarkable modern AI technology to know how well a patient is being taken care of. So there's new innovations every day with AI in the medical field to help doctors deliver better healthcare.
I think moving from the practices to the principles, I think it's very important precisely to know that things are happening already. Maybe a quick reminder that on the sort of research side, we've been discussing this since the 60s, okay? So it's been half a century. It's not a novelty, but it's only now that it's hitting the public, the politicians, society. The first great debate, if you want to check, is free online. The debate between two great guys, Wiener and Samuel. Wiener, the father of cybernetics, Samuel, the father of machine learning. They published these two papers in Science, and one is warning us against the risks of automation and what we call now AI, cybernetics and so on. The other one is highlighting the opportunities, the pro. So the pro and contra have been there for a while. But I think it's important to realize that we're now coming to an end of that particular chapter. And the microphone might actually see. Yep. Yes.
Stay still.
So the end of the chapter, not the microphone, which is we're really moving from discussing the what principles to chapter 2, where we have started discussing the how practices. And there, in moving from chapter 1 to chapter 2, principles to practices, what we see is that the principles have been very helpful, but it's also time to start doing something on the basis of those principles. So anyone here who thinks, oh, maybe I can put forward another set of principles, well, there's plenty already. Last check, 75 documents will list guidelines, frameworks from anyone and his uncle, okay? So now we have the European Commission, the OECD, even China coming together, the G20 is thinking about another, so anyone, chapter 1 has been written. We need to do exactly what you were saying. No, start writing chapter 2. The practices, how we move to the real world and address the 17 in a very concrete way.
Who's we?
We, the world, we, the people.
Yeah, Kate was on stage yesterday, on the Impact stage yesterday, talking about if aliens will come to Earth, they will ask who's the manager here. So we have on the donuts economic, we need to see progresses in multiple areas. I think Goal 17 is about collaborating together. And I think that chapter needs to be written. So if anyone is feeling courageous or bold to write a new guideline or a new set of tenets, I think it should be on goal number 17.
I mean, just to pick back up that point, Luciano, if there's 44 or 75 or however many are, I mean, is global governance of AI the most important thing to get right before we can even dream of solving the SDGs at scale? Is it just a massive roadblock because there's so much confusion in the landscape at the moment?
I think it's a bit of an interplay. You know, like even in football, we adapt every now and then the rules to the game. So there is no fixed rules first and then you play. You play and change the rules, you improve the rules, and then you play better. So here, we really have to get all the lessons, as Norberto was saying. It's not just a matter of mapping, but understanding what works and what doesn't, why it didn't work. No, goodwill, there was money, there was a good project, but it didn't quite fly, maybe because the problem owners were not really engaged. So there's a lot of learning. The learning will feed into the general framework, which will then enable, but in this interplay, that's where progress really happens. So I'm much more open to the idea that these two things should talk to each other rather than, as you hear sometimes, so first principles, and then we do. I know I use the metaphor chapter 1, chapter 2, but what happens in chapter 2 sometimes changes what you think in terms of chapter 1.
I think the risk is that with AI in particular, we've seen the Matrix, we've seen the Terminator. There's a lot of fear about the black box. There's a lot of fear about what that robot is going to do. There's more fear with AI because of fear of job loss, because of fear of what Sophia, that robot, is going to do. And because of that, we think we've heard that AI is already being used for good, but there's a lot of fear about the bad that AI can do. And if we don't really push these partnerships, if we don't really push for some good governance in place, because we know there's good that's happening, and I thought you said something really profound earlier, that we know that about what good can be done, but if we don't push to make sure that the harm doesn't happen, regulators may be forced to control that harm by regulating, and if there's fragmentation of regulation, then AI can't succeed the way the internet has succeeded. That fragmentation will not allow AI to really be successful out in the world. There is obviously the AI that happens in China and in some of the countries where they won't have that same level of regulation that we will have in Western society. And so therefore, I think with the peer pressure that we need to put in place to have these really positive governance frameworks, and that peer pressure that can exist between society, government, and the companies that exist, I think those of us that really believe in AI for good and believe in good governance frameworks, that believe in the ethics believe that there's some pressure right now to make that happen.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of points. I actually think that chapter 2 is already being written or starting. So two examples would be the EU ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI and the recent recommendation on AI by the OECD, two important documents laying out principles and guidelines of how we should be building technology, AI that would be deemed trustworthy. What is interesting is the second phase. So the European Commission is starting a pilot phase, seeking feedback from companies, asking them to, can you run these guidelines? They have actually an assessment list, a sort of like checklist. Can you run them in your products, in your features, and tell us what is working, what is not? So, and I think this is where we're actually moving from principles to practice to really understand the feasibility of all of this theoretical input that has been done. And the same thing apparently will be done also through the OECD. There's also asking how that recommendation actually plays out in practice. And this is something that we at Facebook are also doing is really understanding how in practice some of these principles or requirements actually play out. We are working with Singaporean government with a number of startups in the region to understand what AI explainability actually means in practice. So we've been running a couple of workshops and working with them, understanding when we talk about explaining this automated, opaque, some like black box systems, what does that mean in practice when you would have a requirement to actually make them understandable? What would that mean for their business models, for their competitive advantage? How would you enforce such type of requirements? So we are working very hard on that. And I think this is a really good news and opportunity to have actually governments or companies partnering with governments in understanding and figuring out this together. And I think it's important for us as a tech company to offer our know-how, our expertise as technology producers to really make sense of all these principles and guidelines that have been put forward.
You want to build on that, Luciano?
I just wanted to connect to the great points that have just been made. And actually, for disclosure, I'm one of the members of the high-level expert group of the European Commission. The work that we have done already completed is this framework for the ethics of AI. The work that we are completing as we speak is precisely, as Norbert was saying, the applications. Now, how do you embed these values concretely in Europe? Now, or I should say probably in the European Union, carefully. But in this point, the fear of AI was one of the things that you can either trust me or check online because the documents are available there. The first draft that we had of the ethical guidelines had a whole section about red lines. And those red lines were science fiction. There were things like, we will never allow conscious AI. We will not allow Terminator to raise from wherever corner of Hollywood you find him. Now, I thought very strongly, and I'm happy to be on record with this, to make sure that in Europe, at the European Commission, we will not have a strong word against science fiction and a weak word in favor of reality. So if you look at the final document, those terrible red lines that you will never cross, namely never create zombies, thank you so much, well, they're no longer there, not because they are not real problems, but because we don't want to be distracted precisely by fears that are ungrounded. The last thing we want to have is to have immense opportunity cost for the economies here. You know what I'm talking about. Things you haven't.
Try that mic.
Yeah.
Give it
We
up.
give up on this. Opportunity cost, things that you haven't done because maybe you fear that there was unethical or a potential backlash, and instead make sure that those opportunities are actually taken. Now that's why, going back to the two comments before, fear are misguided and used to thought they were funny, but they're actually irresponsible now. We got real problems. And the European Commission is doing a good job. Last comment, I got colleagues, which I will not name because they're not here to defend themselves, who actually went public many times saying the worst thing that we have today, the major problem that humanity has, is AI. I would like to invite them to share one day only, with 700 million people who do not have clean water every day. Now that is the fear that we need to have. That's 10% of humanity. AI and Terminator, distracting and irresponsible.
And I'll just add to the explainability point because I think it's incredibly important, and it also is a responsibility that we have to the people that are using AI, and explainable to whom, because of course there's always that question of, well, an engineer could understand it, but could the average person understand it? So I think it's really important to have that invitation and understand at what level do people need to be able to understand what an algorithm means, and it is a really important part of the discussion.
Yeah, just the one point that I would add to the fear, I think there's this, in the imagination of people, like AI is this like kind of remote robot coming from another planet. Like actually the problem, but also maybe the promise of AI is that it's actually profoundly human. And that's the problem sometimes, because it just inherits and embeds a lot of our flaws. So when we talk about bias and fairness, the problem here is that AI at the end of the day is a product of the data that is trained on. That data comes from people, and people have their flaws, their virtues. So if you don't do good enough work at understanding and mitigating those biases that are just inherent on the data sets, obviously AI will just magnify and propagate those biases. So the problem with AI is not of some remote robot, is actually from very profound human flaws that might be inherited. And this is only with the data sets. When we talk about supervised systems, when you actually have to classify the data, you also have the problem there with bias, because if you don't have a consistent process through which to annotate that data, bias will creep in again. So the problem with AI is inherently a human problem, not some robotic problem.
And with AI, I think, and you speak about bias, it is, of course, exacerbating some of the biases and the unconscious biases that we've already seen, and that is creating some of the larger digital divide that we're already seeing in the world, and particularly the world online.
Talking about bias and data, I think it's obvious today and is known academically and through research that the notion of bias is well understood. We don't know to what extent yet, but keep doing research, and you know that very well, ethical issues. But what we lack is baselines and benchmarks. We don't have clean sets of data that can be used for what purpose, enough metadata, enough context that explains that if you want to solve this problem related to asthma or to blindness or to clean water, what set of data can you choose, can you work on, what has been gathered, is it safe to use, what are the limitations, what are the unintended consequences that we know about. So this huge layer of understanding around what data has been used for and can be used for is not documented today. As we keep building data, I think there's really two words, the past data and the upcoming data. So as we capture new data, we can be more aware of that fact and probably build it properly and signal the impact of that data. But for past data, the cost of labeling, cleaning, tagging, importing, surfacing, and so forth is huge. I think what we need is probably a common layer of data sets. We had ImpactNet, we had the UCI more than 20 years ago, the UC Irvine, California, started providing more data sets online. ImageNet was a huge example of how basically for competent people come together and create a massive knowledge network. We need to have more knowledge network around the system, what goes on each domains, so that we can use clean and qualified and labeled data in whatever it means. So these data are trying to solve problems, can rely on clean data, if we use the term clean properly, rather than just going and find new data. Because problem solving is one element and scaling is another one. Most of the problems that are solved are sitting on a shelf and basically published, but they're not scaled. So if we talk about addressing the goals, we need to scale. We need to give everyone agency to take that solution and to build it, either through government support or through entrepreneurship support. So the scaling is really the issue, and to scale, we need to have new, fresh data all the time. It's not just some data that's sitting somewhere. We need to have a massive effort of creating data. We start this process ourselves at XPRIZE because of necessity, because all those 150 teams suggested that to us. Now we're publishing it in an open source way, what we found, including the ethical guidelines that we used for the others to use, but we're just one actor. We need hundreds of actors that play this game and collectively share what I called clean, labeled, qualified, safe to use data, at least to help those who are trying to solve problems on their own, have no biases entered. There's so many other biases that we are talking about it, including problem biases, but at least make sure that those who are using machine learning, because AI is not just machine learning, and machine learning is just emergent part of AI. We're still very far from true AI and reasoning and everything else. But because machine learning is bringing us so much benefit today, at least make sure that we enable all problem solvers that are trying to help and support where they are with a layer of credible and safe to use, without any encumbrance, set of data, algorithms, ethical framework, and non-biased approaches, so that actually that problem-solving approach can be repeated and launched. We really need a Wikipedia of problem-solving with AI that we don't have today.
Okay.
And that's really something that we learned that we don't have. And as everyone is trying to fragment their effort towards different goals, we need a global collaboration on that. And this is a critical point.
Yeah, just a very quick point. I completely agree. The other thing that I would add is the importance of documenting and talking about that data. There are a number of projects from companies in association with universities talking about data sheets for data sets or data nutrition labels. The OECD talks about traceability of data sets, and this is all the idea of not only having clean data sets, but also how do you actually document them? How do you actually tell the experts, but also people impacted by these algorithms, what is represented in those data sets? To what extent are they representative? To what extent are they a nice departure point to mitigate bias? So I totally agree with you. I think those projects are very welcome, and having a consistent way to document those data sets will be equally important.
Very good. I just wanted to sort of move it on to look forwards a little bit here. I mean, what have we heard so far? Thanks for clarifying that we're not in some sci-fi focus here, Luciano. I think the twin side of the narrative is the hype-fueled kind of narrative that surrounds AI as well. There was the report that came out 4 months ago from a VC that suggested that the 2,500 AI companies in Europe, in 40% of cases, had no discernible AI in them. So there's kind of this twin track of the dystopian negative narrative coupled with this utopian tech solutionism approach as well. And unfortunately, the narrative is not helped by the woeful array of poor stories that come out in the press on a daily basis around AI that's been irresponsibly harnessed. So I think most people here in the room are here because they're genuinely excited about how they could start solving real problems with AI. And to get there, I would be keen to understand, taking into account this array of challenges we have around ethics and bias and security and privacy, issues around the explainability and interpretability of solutions, the inequitable distribution of wealth garnered from AI, the impacts on the workforce. We have this whole slate of challenges, obstacles, concerns in business to overcome. We've just heard a little bit there about maybe some data commons solutions, but what are the practical things that people in the room here can do in their businesses to align their focus on solving real problems, such as the SDGs, with AI? Luciano?
I can share something that we have been doing here in the UK that addresses at least partially what you were highlighting as a question. You know that the UK has an innovation program at a national level called the Catapult. For someone from Rome, has a funny name. But we catapult things one way or another. And the particular one in question is that the Digital Catapult. The Digital Catapult here in London has a specific program called Machine Garage, which supports the development of startups in AI. We've been working with them for some time. I chair the advisory board for the ethics stuff. And so there, what we have found, much to some surprise initially, was a need for understanding the environment, both ethically and legally, even more than the support on the technical side or the financial side. So if you divide this thing into 3 blocks, say technical, financial, and social, ethical, legal, how am I going to navigate in this world? The third block was the one that has so far attracted most interest. It might be because these are all NGOs, they're all of a different age from mine, and they look at the world and they want to change it for better. But there's an enormous drive in that respect. And the Digital Catapult has done a very good job in putting forward some guidelines, very practical, based on the principles that we have discussed before, on how to move forward. So that is something that you can check on the website, and is available for any NGO that wants to have some advice from, quote-unquote, the government.
Anyone else want to stab at practical next steps to move this forward?
I think one encouraging next step is to focus, as you said, on real problems and try to encourage defining what impact means. I'm going to borrow an example from what we've seen in one of the teams that we followed, is that if you think about machine vision and detecting, like, say, skin cancer or some form of skin diseases through imagery, or some retinopathy through the eye, you can imagine that if you go to a research hospital and you have access to MRI images and start large-scale statistical imagery computational data, you can probably at 98%, 99% detect exact condition of the skin or the eye. But How about we're able to satisfy ourselves with 80% accuracy? And if we had to satisfy with 80% accuracy, maybe we can embed those technology capabilities, which are basic machine learning, into smartphones and give access not only to 1 million people that can go to clinical hospitals and research hospitals, but to probably 2 billion people that could immediately have access to false positives immediately on their pocket. So that's a form of impact that we can think through entrepreneurship and understanding how we can actually bring those benefits, of course, without biases, with the clean data, everything else, but how can we make sure that the same program is taught properly so it can address skins of people living in Africa versus people living in East Asia or the Eskimos, because the conditions are different, the detections are different, but these are easy targets. How can we use low technology to give access to people to benefit from AI? We have 7 billion people today. I think half of them have access to online internet, and of the 3.5 billion, probably less than 3 million people globally are involved in some way, shape, or form into what we call AI. So a ratio of 1 to 1,000. How can we be more people to talk about real problems? Because the more we approach real problems, the more we're going to see that they are actually following the Sustainable Development Goals. They're basically clustered, and the general problem-solving approaches that we have, if we think about impact, and I'm not saying I have the answer for impact, but if we collectively define some measure for impact, to make it available to more people, then we make probably some progress through AI to the goals.
So education and literacy is also going to have a massive impact through AI. We know that the smartphone is the most widely used AI tool in the world, and through that, we know that we can deliver security. We know that we can deliver facial recognition. We know that there's massive potential impact through AI, and to be delivering more AI tools through the smartphone. We know that it's broadly accessible. We know that there's people that may not have access to modern technologies and other types of technologies. They may not have shoes, but they can get a smartphone. And there's massive, massive opportunities for learning and education to broaden that potential for digital divide. I think that the smartphone and educational tools is really one area that we can focus on.
Yeah, a couple of notes. That I think AI is enhancing creativity, not only on people that are building technology, but also people that are governing or thinking about regulating technology. So a couple of examples on the technology side. Once you actually can train a machine to understand concepts in images, you can trigger a vast number of applications that can be really applied in a very beneficial way. So talking about computer vision, I'll give you two quick examples. One is that we do at Facebook. Once you actually can train a machine to understand concepts and you can actually understand what's in the photo, you can actually generate an audio description for people that are visually impaired or blind that access Facebook through voice readers. And instead of just hearing that there's a photo there, they can now hear what's in that photo. You know, people smiling in the beach, walking a dog, being in a boat, eating a pizza. And that makes a world of difference to that community. Not on the clear product side, but also on the research side. Once you train machines to understand through satellite images where a building is, you can actually produce what we call population density maps. You can understand by merging satellite data with census data with machine learning to understand where buildings are. You can estimate how many people are in these buildings. And once you do that, you can actually use those maps to support relief agencies or first responders when there's a disaster that happens, or you can help governments better understand how to connect villages or how to think about transportation in that area. So AI is really enhancing creativity, and the trick here is really using that power for good. But then what's really interesting also, being on the public policy side, is seeing also creativity from the governance and regulatory side of things. There is something that is becoming quite trendy, which is the idea of sandbox, of really experimenting what type of requirements might be too severe, which one should be relieved in order for companies to produce and deliver their innovation through their products. So there's a lot of the idea around policy experimentation, of understanding throughout the vast array of different governance models, from hard laws to soft instruments to ethical principles by companies to ethical frameworks by NGOs. How can we play out with all those pieces of the puzzle, understanding and calibrate what is the best combination for specific technology? So it's an exciting time to be working on this area because you see a lot of creativity. And the last point is might sound like a cliche, but the importance of social sciences in the development of AI. We need lawyers, we need philosophers, we need historians, we need anthropologists, because some of the questions that AI poses go way beyond AI as a technical discipline. It's about, when we talk about fairness, is understanding what concept of fairness is actually makes sense for the products that we are building. How do we define who is actually being impacted by a given automated decision, and how do we actually subgroup them, and how do we make sure that it's not being discriminatory? When we talk about fairness, are we talking about treating everybody equally regardless of the outcomes, or should we actually treat people differently so we can actually arrive at equal outcomes for everybody? And these are really old, ancient questions that are being resurfaced, and for which we cannot only depend on engineers and product managers. We need the social scientists to help us out with that.
Just a few minutes left. There is an opportunity to come and meet the speakers just out here afterwards. If you've got any questions to follow up, we'd love to have you along for a chat. Just in conclusion, it would be great maybe starting at this end with you, Carolyn, if there's a kind of a call to action here, if there's a community here empowered looking to really start moving on this agenda, starting to accelerate progress towards this, is there anything people in the room can take action to themselves to join this movement, to embed this in their organizations?
Absolutely. I think if you look at your organization and you decide, and obviously peanut buttering really never makes a big impact. So I think you have to look at what's most important to your organization, what will really move the needle, and pick one thing, pick three things, and decide what would really be meaningful and purposeful for your organization and work on those. That's what really starts to make a movement work. And obviously benchmarking, right? Look at what others are doing, decide how it works for them, and then test and move the needle when it starts to realize that one direction isn't working, and then move from there. I think bias in particular is a particularly interesting area because we all have our biases. It exists, and it's one of those things that if you don't make intentional actions, if you don't address it at its core, if you don't do something, nothing will happen.
All of the above, plus my contribution here is using just one word, coordination, in the following sense. A lot of the projects we see around are too small to make a difference. I don't care what you see on some of the delivery coaches around, say, every little thing makes a difference. Not true. Not true. So there's a car out there that is not moving. I go and push. And I come back home and I sleep because, I went and I did my little bit. I pushed the car. Car didn't go anywhere. Everybody in this room goes and push. We all sleep soundly. The car is still there, broken, because there is no coordination. 5 of us, not all, 5. We go, coordinated, push, and then the car moves. Coordination is what we need, among many other things, to make sure that AI for good will make a difference and pass the threshold of irrelevant, nada, and scalable differences making a real impact in the world. So for me, coordination.
As Norberto was saying, there's still hope for philosophers yet, Luciano, so proving the point. Amir, concluding remarks?
I didn't dare say all of the above plus, but I totally agree. I think we are in the beginning of an era again where technology is creating a shift, and that shift is another excuse for us to look at problems in a different lens. And I think all of us are smart in some ways, differently. We are curious, we're imaginative, we're creative, and AI gives us this new tool of discovery and imagination and creativity. I think there's a real opportunity for all of us to be looking for real problems and be involved more than before. So the empowerment that AI can give to all of us today and 5 years from and 10 years from now, I think this is a formidable opportunity to transition us into a new era of taking ownership of those problems and not relying on others to do it. And this goes along what you said in terms of coordination, but also taking direct ownership of finding the real problems that are around us. and finding and matching people that can help fix it. And this is actually an empowerment that we need to encourage.
Thanks, Amir. And briefly as well, Norberto?
No, this is kind of a trap because now I'm the last one, and you've all said
I'll
everything
wrap
that I
up.
wanted to say. So yeah, all
Say
of
what
the
you mean,
above
go on.
for sure. I think coordination is always super important. I would say collaboration. I think we at Facebook are very invested in partnering with governments, with NGOs, with our industry peers in advancing AI, and particularly in understanding how AI can meet and attain the SDGs. One of the things that we're very invested on is understanding the problem. And I would, again, go to the project that we are developing with the Digital Ethics Lab at Oxford. It's really important to understand what are the gaps, why certain objectives lend themselves to technology support while others are being left behind. What are the underlying reasons behind that? And I think that's super important so that we can then support governments and other agencies in understanding how they should allocate their funding, their resources to create this level playing field for all the SDGs. So collaboration, but also research and understanding the underlying problems that we currently have.
Thank you very much, Norberto. I'm getting the Terminator eye from the back now, so I think that's our time is up. But whilst I get rid of these welly boots, please do join us around the back for the Meet the Speaker. And just final thanks to Norberto, Amir, Luciano, and Carolyn. Thank you very much.